Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Let's talk about the right versus the left and what's going on in the United States, in the world generally. What is this dichotomy? Why do we have it? So here's how I think. I think there's a lot of information around us today that will allow us to view it the following way. There is going to be a group of people. This is sort of like, let's imagine Darwinian, let's put our Darwinian evolution hat on. Certain groups form up in society. One of them gathers people in as long as they mouth the same thing, and it's rather powerful, and it has money, and if you get into it, they will give you money. So that's one group. Another group only forms up together once in a while. The members of the group are all of the people who don't fit into groups and don't care about grouping and are just going about their way of life. And once in a while something brings them together, usually a disaster of some kind, war or famine or bad harvest or something like this. And so you've got the two groups, one that's always doing something as long as everybody inside of it agrees, they're always growing and moving forward. And the other group that only forms up together in disasters. One of them is the Democrats or the left or the lazy people in society who want to grab wealth from others instead of producing something. And the distributed people are the producers. And it takes quite a lot to get them together. So I think it's a pretty natural division that happens. And you say, well, how are the individuals ever going to win? And I'm telling you, they don't usually. In almost every country ever in the history of all of the world, they don't. And if it weren't for the United States of America coming along, slavery wouldn't have been challenged. Now, Britain ended slavery on their little island, but who's to say it won't come back quite soon? So if it weren't for the United States, slavery would never have been challenged. World War I wouldn't have been won. World War II wouldn't have been won. The Cold War wouldn't have been won. So what if we lost the Civil War, World War I, World War II, and the Cold War? That's what the world would look like without the United States. And indeed, that is largely what Europe is coming to look like very quickly here. There is a civil war forming up in Europe, and if 100,000 people were raped in the rape of Nanking, and that's something we still talk about 70 or 80 years later, how many rapes have happened in Europe in the last, let's say, 10 years? Let's go wild and say 20 years, because all that scandal about the child rape gangs in Rotterdam, in England, that was 1,500 rape cases across like 8 years, and that was one town. So let's say that there are 1,000 towns in Europe that are experiencing that. So there's 150,000 rapes in 10 years. And it's gone on longer than that, and I'll bet there's more than that. So we could call it the rape of Europe that's happening. Certainly the videos that were posted online when this was getting out of control and now have been shut down. These people who post these videos get put in jail for hate speech and Islamophobia. But they were posting videos. Remember the little girl who said, please help us, we can't, it's not safe on our streets. The guy who went to the swimming pool in Germany because people had grabbed his daughter, and he ended up being arrested for Islamophobia or racism or something like this, xenophobia. So you can't protect yourself or you'll be arrested. You can't talk about it on social media or you'll be arrested. You will end up in court and in jail if you talk about it or if you defend yourself. So it's happening. It's been happening for more than a decade. So what hope do we have? Well, we've got the Second Amendment. We've got the First Amendment. That's fading fast. They're fighting hard against that. The scandal at Evergreen College could be mentioned here. Look it up if you don't know about it. There's some documentaries available on it now. Imagine being surrounded by a pack of wild beasts. Now, if children are never educated, they get to the age of 20, they virtually cannot read. They virtually cannot read. They know nothing about they think that World War II started in the 1700s. They think that George Washington and Abraham Lincoln lived at the same time. They think that Hitler died sometime around 1902, if you ask them. They have no clue about anything. They're very, very uneducated. And they're surrounding you. And they want you to do something. And you try to reason with them. And that's not going to work. So I think it's hilarious that the destruction of the mind that is emanated from the universities, seems like the chickens are coming home to roost there first and foremost. These professors who sat there and listened to this utter garbage of ethnic studies and feminism and identity politics for years and years. They knew what was going on. Victor Davis Hanson resigned from his college, from his professorship one time, and the dean said, "Oh, come on, don't do that. We can work something out. You're going to lose your pension. You're going to lose this. You're going to lose your benefits. You're going to lose everything if you just quit like that." And he said, "You know what? They're teaching Mexifornia in the classes here, that Mexico should take California back." He said, "I can't be a teacher here." Now, I don't remember if he actually did stay and teach or what. Something happened, but men of principle won't stand by. Until there's a fist in their face, some people won't do anything. And that's what happened at Evergreen College. There was actually a fist put into the face of these people. I remember saying, that's a phrase that I used years ago when I was upset about what was going on and I was in university. And people said, I said, this is an issue of freedom of speech or whatever. I said, this is an issue of freedom. This is an issue that's going to be serious. When it comes down to it, there will be torture chambers. People will be enforcing this with torture chambers and guns. And everybody waved their hands and said, no, come on. All we're talking about is being more nice and opening dialogues. Do you remember the dialogues? Everybody wanted to open dialogues. Dialogues are gone, aren't they? The left is done with dialogues, aren't they? And I said, well, this is not going to end well. And I said, this won't change until they have a fist in their face. And then they'll have to deal with it. And that's the point we've unfortunately gotten to on our university campuses. Mobs of students grabbing the microphone during naming ceremonies. The mob of students coming into a faculty gathering where someone was celebrating their 30th university with the school or something like this, and they took the cake and they came in and took all the food from the banquet and took it out. Like in Soviet Russia after the revolution, all the rich people's houses were moved into by the mobs, and what used to be a 14-bedroom house for a nice cozy family of 9 and a few extra bedrooms for visitors and stuff, now each bedroom had a family of 9, and now there's 150 people living in the place. And how nice do you think those houses were 5 years later? They were apartment buildings, and they were apartment buildings for people that didn't own the place. And that's what happened to the housing stock in Russia. Well, that's what's going to happen to our universities. The mobs are just going to take them over. Now, maybe it won't go that far, but it will in Europe, because they cannot stop this shit in Europe. There was a time when everybody said, greed is bad, profits are bad, huge companies are bad, right? Sound familiar? It was the 1890s, and they instituted something called the Antitrust Act, which they called these things a trust, when a whole bunch of companies would get together. It was the nail trust, the manufacturers of nails. They all got together and they fixed prices and stuff. Or the railroad trust, or this trust, that trust. It was the trust buster era, and antitrust laws came into effect. And how are the antitrust laws doing? Well, we did some pretty nasty things with them. The controls, 12, 15 years later, we put in controls over the federal government, the federal money supply. The Fed itself came into existence 1912 or 13, which caused the Depression less than a generation later. Within 20 years, we had the Depression. So that was great. We had it pretty rough, we gotta admit. What happened in Europe? Starting in 1890, when this stuff started just going crazy, it even got into law in the United States. What happened in Europe starting in 1890? Well, go forward a couple of decades, you're in the middle of World War I. Go forward another decade, the Nazis are starting to gain momentum. Go forward another decade, the Nazis own Germany, and Russia is in the grips of a socialist communist revolution where everybody's sharing everything, no greed, no selfishness, everybody share everything, no companies anymore, ownership by the people. It's like the antitrust laws of 1890s in America, run amok with no protections to stop them. That's what the antitrust laws are doing in slow motion in America, but we've got too many protections in place. So over a century later, we have not made the progress that Europe made in 20 years with this garbage. That's what's happening also with civil war today. Everybody's afraid, or some people are talking about civil war in America. Nope. Nope. But in Europe, yes. Now eventually, yeah, we're going to look like Venezuela if we keep going down this road. But if we don't go down this road, if we keep our guns and we keep our freedom to speak, then we're not going to go down that road. We're going to have people come out of the woodwork like Jordan Peterson, and we'll be okay. Things will happen. Jordan Peterson's not fantastic, but also the objectivists are allowed to speak. Dave Rubin switches from the left to what he says is whatever he says he is. And this stuff's going to keep happening. Honest people will leave that group and come to the Free Thinkers Association, as we might call it. Alright, so how did we start this video? I think this video, when I started, was on the subject of groupthink, gathering people, just naturally gathering. It will conglomerate people if it has stability, if it has power. And today it has the stability in the United States. It owns the government, so it can dole out jobs to its members. And it owns the government, so it can dole out money to its supporters. And it owns the university system, and it owns the unions. And so that's a lot of power, that's a lot of money. And it owns the schools, and it owns most of the medical community. Most of the doctors are in favor of socialism. I have a cousin who's a doctor, and he told me we want socialism because then we would get fair wages and a regular work week, because right now you work 50, 60, 70, 80 hours. He says under socialism it would be 40-hour work week. We wouldn't have to, we'd be treated like decent humans. It wouldn't be a scramble for profits. Wow, is that right? So, do you know that? Did you know that if we got socialized medicine, the doctors expect their workload to reduce by 50%? Did you know that? You think all these untreated people are suddenly going to magically get care. Well, how about half of the amount of care is happening now instead of before when they were getting paid? They don't want to work like dogs. And so to think that they're going to double their workload and get paid less is ridiculous. That's not what they think is going to happen. So you got groupthink and people doling out other people's money, and that's a pretty powerful group. And then you got everybody else that has to gang up together when they can. And that's what the right's doing today. We're gathering up everybody but the loonies. Because the loonies have all gathered together. One neck for one leash, those fucking fools. Now, I don't know what I'm going to title this video. So good luck if you found it. I think that the subject of this video is Civil War in America, but if I title it that, the overlords will never allow it to be published. I can't use the word war, and I can't. There's a lot of things I can't do. Who knows what I can do? Also, MeWe. Go for MeWe. I'm going to do a video on that at some point. That's what I think of why the left is the way it is and the right is the way it is. And I don't think there's anything we can do about it. I think that that's just the Darwinian nature of the thing. There will be a group that will gather people together who don't want to think and are looking for a free ride. And everybody else will have to defend themselves against this group once in a while. That's just the nature of the thing.